The New Quantum Era,
a podcast
by Sebastian Hassinger
and Kevin Rowe.
Welcome back to the New Quantum Era. This is Sebastian, and Kevin is with me for a change, finally. Thanks for rejoining, Kevin. Good to have you back.
Good to be back, man.
The fans have been clamoring for your return. We've got a great episode today. We were made aware of a research paper out of a group. It's actually a startup called Nord Quantique in Sherbrooke, Quebec, Canada. They're a spin-out from the University of Sherbrooke, which is quite a good school for quantum computing research. And they've got some really interesting results in this paper, and we're going to be speaking to their CEO and co-founder in just a minute. I'm really excited about this conversation, Kevin.
Yeah, interesting paper. We'll post the link for the team. But this whole domain of quantum error correction continues to be just thriving in so many areas, and I think fascinating, both science and physics and math. So let's dive in. But I think this is going to be a good one. Welcome back to the New Quantum Era. Hey, it's Kevin Rowe, and today we have our guest named Dr. Julien Camirand Lemyre. He's the co-founder and CEO of Nord Quantique. We'll be digging into the topic of quantum error correction and also about the missions of Nord Quantique and other interesting market developments. Welcome.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Kevin, Sebastian.
Hi. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, so we usually begin our podcast by asking our guests about their pathway through their arc of their career that led them to quantum computing. Not always a common path for a lot of people trained in physics, but tell us about your journey into this interesting domain.
So I like to say that I was born and raised in quantum. So starting to be introduced to the field. So I was doing quantum physics during basically my whole studies. But at the bachelor's degree, I was fortunate enough to be working with a lot of the quantum systems. At first, it was really on quantum material, trying to understand the exotic properties, the exotic magnetic properties of some materials that were new to the field. But after this, I got at the master and PhD degree level, I was introduced to quantum information processing and also quantum computing, where I study a lot of different physical systems, with the objective in mind that we want to make a system more scalable for quantum computing purposes. And what I've studied at the University of Sherbrooke at that time was a lot of different systems ranging from spin qubit to Majorana devices and also hybrid spin and superconducting systems. So a lot of this work I've been doing during my PhD.
That's great. Thanks for joining us, Julien. We really appreciate you spending time with us. And so you were at the University of Sherbrooke. So Nord Quantique is a spin-out then from that work that was started there?
Definitely. So Nord Quantique is a spin-off from Institut Quantique. So Institut Quantique is a very famous quantum institute that is affiliated with University of Sherbrooke. And before Nord Quantique started, so we spin it off from a famous lab in superconducting circuits and device, which is the lab of Alexandre Blais. But this is a theory group, so they mostly work on everything superconducting circuits. So trying to make these circuits better and try finding new protocols also for these and understanding these systems at their very core. But what was closer to our heart is, of course, the work on bosonic qubits that was being done by Alexandre Group at that moment, and really spun off from this effort as a company.
And so Alexandre, I think, sorry. Go ahead. No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Thanks. So is it fair to say that Nord Quantique, one of its major market theses, its direction is the exploration of the applications of bosonic qubits? Is that a fair summary?
Definitely. So the idea that we follow, since we spun off from there, was really trying to use these systems, so these bosonic systems, to try to make qubits that can be quantum error corrected in and by themselves. And the idea behind this is, of course, trying to use quantum error correction to build better qubits, but also to make systems that scales better as you add more and more of these qubits together. And this is really the purpose of Nord Quantique, trying to build these qubits, but also make it in a system that can be scaled afterward.
That's really cool. And so, Alexandre, you mentioned leads the Institut Quantique at University of Sherbrooke. He's part of the Yale gang, right? Along with Jay Gambetta and Chad Rigetti, and he's that group that sort of started up under the supervision of Gervin and Sholkoff and Deveray, and really was the birthplace of the transmon, sort of the first really sophisticated design for superconducting qubits, right?
Exactly. So Alexandre was there during that time. So he was one of the co-inventor of the transmons. You're right on that topic. Of course, he continued doing a lot of great work here at Institut Quantique, and we're fortunate enough also to have a close collaboration on some of these bosonic systems that we are studying.
So this is, I think, an interesting area for us to maybe delve down a little bit lower level on the technology and the science. Because, I think for a lot of our audience, they've heard, of course, of the transmon system and of course, qubit architectures. So they're very familiar, almost intuitively with the fermionic notion, right, of the way qubits are. But, in your paper, and so much of where Nord Quantique is going, you're exploring how transmons, right, the core fundamental architecture for so much of these advances, is instead set up to operate in a way that creates bosonic qubits. So could we just get into some more of the detail for the benefit of our audience in terms of that contrast? Because it's interesting, right, that one architecture can represent both distinct systems.
And definitely, Kevin. So there's two questions in your question. One is about why bosonic codes and why should we care about these, and the other one is about the architecture and how different or how similar it is to other architecture like Google or IBM that are also pursuing the transmon approach. So I'll start with the first one, and this story basically starts with quantum error correction. So the basic ingredient behind quantum error correction is redundancy. So if you have a system that is faulty, not necessarily qubit, it's true also in classical communication, in classical information processing, where if you have noise in your system and that you know that you'll be making error, what you would try to do is find ways to mitigate noise and being able to detect whether an error occurs or not. And this is error correction. And for example, if you're sending a signal to a distant satellite in space and you're just trying to communicate with that satellite, if the signal is very faint, maybe it's what you want to send. If you're trying to send a 0 to the satellite as a message, maybe you want to send a string of zeros. So if some of them flip, you'll be able to recover from just witnessing what happens to these bits. This is really the basic principle behind error correction is redundancy. So if you want to correct and detect error, you need some form of redundancy. Now, in quantum computing, algorithms are different than in classical communication or classical processing, but the basic idea is still the same. So you'll try to leverage some form of redundancy to correct these errors. In basic qubit system, where you have like the transmons, for example, you were mentioning, the way you would do it is use several instances of this transmon. So maybe a string or an array of these, and try to call this what we call a logical qubit. And then you operate an algorithm in that logical qubit and try to correct and detect error on that qubit. Bosonic code are different in that perspective. Because in bosonic code, what we use is a bunch of photons. So not only a state which is a 0 or 1, but we can have many, many photons inside a resonator or a cavity. So we can store them for a millisecond lifetime in superconducting circuits. And these photons, because we have many, we can encode them into a qubit that can be called a logical qubit that can be error corrected by itself. So this is the difference where bosonic codes differs from qubit architecture, is that we have now this capability of correcting error on single qubits.
So interesting. And, I guess one of the perspectives that maybe is new to our audience is that only some of these quantum architectures can realize this sort of like, dual use approach, right, of implementing both fermionic and bosonic systems. And so Transmon is one of those unique architectures. Kind of a compelling difference, right?
So exactly. So in our case, we don't use transmon as the core ingredient. So if you compare our architecture to different ones, so more standard one in superconducting circuits, for example, on superconducting circuits, you often have a bunch of resonator or strip lines that are used to send microwave photons to control transmons. This is how the architecture is usually built. In our case, it's kind of the reverse. So we will drive transmon to be able to control a resonator or a cavity. And the reason we do this is to access the physics I was just describing. So access the bosonic properties of resonators and cavities. And the idea here is just that we can store a lot of photons in there for a long period of time and trying to control it. The thing is, in any quantum system, if you want to build a quantum computer, you need some nonlinearity at some point, and this is where the transmons come into play. In our architecture, this is just used as a means to control the resonator and the photon state inside that resonator.
So the transmon is still responsible for the two-level system then?
The transmon in our case is used, yes, as a two-level system. So we have some ways that we control the system, like in any superconducting qubits where we access other levels. But the point here is just that we use this transmon just to drive the cavity, and that's the point of it. You could see this, that using this transmon enables us to do some operation that will be universal, meaning that we have access to all the set of gates that we need to control our superconducting resonator or cavity.
But even for these bosonic qubits, I mean, it's multiple levels of energy. It's not just
exactly
the standard two. Yes,
yeah.
Right. Yes, right.
I'm
just assuming that gives you the headroom, right, for a lot more redundancy that can be embedded for quantum error correction in one transmon. Yeah.
That's exactly the point. So we now leverage like these many levels that you are describing. We're able to leverage it to encode some bosonic states that have quantum error correction properties. So we can now run a set of pulses on these photons that will provide us the means to do quantum error correction on that system.
Wow! Yeah, just amazing. And I have the impression that you guys must be doing then some pretty detailed custom work right down at the hardware, right down with the firmware. You're not taking somebody's off the shelf QC and doing this. Or, I mean, don't you have to sort of build a lot of this ground up?
So a lot of what we did was actually some of what we did was not existing once we started. So we had to work on it. We had to work hard also on everything that is related to control. So how we control the states, how we improve the control. And this is still a very important topic to our heart. So we're working hard on trying to push the quantum error correction limits as high as possible in these systems.
I was going to ask about control. So is it still like room temperature, like microwave control that you're sort of shooting down into the dill fridge and manipulating the qubits? So that's still the same as other like transmon, other fermionic based superconducting qubits?
Yes, exactly. So the platform that we are using is still a superconducting platform, a superconducting qubit platform. We like it because it provides us a lot of control, and also like superconducting circuits are fast to operate. So this is something that to really like about this. But you're right to say that it's operated in the same way as a standard transmon chip would be. So we have microwave signals that will be sent inside cables within a dilution refrigerator to target our quantum system at millikelvin temperature.
And like other superconducting systems, do you have sort of the syndrome detection and then correction loop, sort of from sort of classical quantum loop that you're going to need to perform to carry out the error correction?
So let's say we refer to the paper that was just out. This is something that we actually didn't need. So the quantum error correction protocol that we've implemented in that paper is autonomous, in the sense that we run a protocol, so we do send signal to the chip, but the results of this is a autonomous quantum error correction protocol. So we don't need this feedback loop. This is done through a dissipation process. So there's a reset of the transmon qubit at some point in the protocol. This is very technical, but the idea is that we can get rid of this feedback loop. Not to say that we won't ever need it. So when we have a full architecture, so these tools are also very useful, being capable of doing this. The measurement detection and then feedback to the quantum system is also important. But we have also different tools which enables autonomous quantum error correction.
I mean, I think that's a great bridge to your paper. I mean, that was, I think, one of the main subjects that we wanted to cover during this interview. I mean, there's some pretty interesting results. I mean, not just the autonomous error correction, but I mean, it feels like there's a rich array here of results explored by this technique that it sounds like Nord Quantique is a pioneer on. Can you give us some of that just summary of the top line results that really thrilled you from this research?
Yeah, definitely. I think one important point we just mentioned. So we've been able to implement an autonomous quantum error correction protocol inside this Bosonic qubits. But what is more exciting for us is actually what the results are. So we've been able to benchmark the performance of this quantum error correction. How we do it is just we compare the lifetime, so how long the quantum information remains in the quantum object, as a function of whether or not we were to apply this quantum error correction protocol. And what we've been able to show is we're actually able to extend the lifetime of the system, showing like a proof of concept for quantum error correction. So this is really why we exist. So this being able to do this quantum error correction protocol on single qubit. And move forward from there. So it's just a basic principle behind our technology that was demonstrated in that paper.
So interesting, and this is excellent. Sounds like advancements in error control, both on bit flip and on phase error. Right? It's like you're really demonstrating significant advances both frontiers.
Yeah, exactly. So this 24% is actually average over the different states that would compose that part. So it indeed includes both bit and phase flip in that case. So this is an average between the two rates.
Wow, and again done autonomously, and on top of all of that, it sounds like you've got some new results with respect to QEC parameters as well. You were able to look at the operating parameters of these systems and make new advances there. Can you comment on that in more detail?
What do you exactly do?
The results around QEC parameters that was talked about in the paper. It sounds as if you've got new results on essentially fine tuning these systems to get them to
exactly. I mean, this is something this is something that we've worked with. So there's a lot of parameters to play with inside these quantum error correction protocols. Started with the vanilla protocol from theory doesn't always cut it, so we need to optimize. There's a lot of work also that we've been doing involving also our close friend at Q Control. So we use also their solution to try to optimize this system, and we were successful doing this. So I think this is what you were referring to. So trying to find ways also to optimize the system. This is something that is still a hot topic on our case. So what is the optimal? How can we get there easily on each qubit? So this is definitely something that we are still working on.
Yeah, I mean, Sebastian, it just feels like this is really a standout approach that could produce some pretty interesting commercial advances. I mean, I don't know the landscape entirely of the different competitors in the mix, but it does seem as if there's real novelty here.
Yeah, the autonomous nature is really exciting. I mean, the idea of being able to detect and correct errors without that round trip to the room temp and the classical computing in some cases, that's really potentially a huge advantage. I mean, I'm curious, like when you look at other schemes for producing logical qubits, there's often sort of a ratio, right? The quantum LDPC codes that IBM is pursuing is something like it's a 288 physical qubits for 12 logical qubits. The QERA approach with neutral atoms is something like 280 physical atoms as qubits that are producing 48 logical qubits. Do you have a similar sense of, in your system architecture, what kind of ratio you'd end up with sort of those fault tolerant logical qubits to physical devices?
Yes, I mean, so it's a bit different in the case of Bosonic codes. Although when you're talking about the architecture, this is what matters in the end. So how many of these qubits will we need to perform something interesting? The way we like to think about this right now is that now with these qubits, we also have a knob to turn, which is this quantum error correction knob on single devices, single units, where we can reduce error rates on these qubits before having to concatenate it into one of the codes that you've mentioned. And
Right.
this is really our focus right now, trying to push that limit as low as possible before thinking about concatenating into a code. And there's also other opportunity. There's also other codes that are only applicable to Bosonic systems that we are looking into. And this is something that will be coming up into our architecture soon enough.
I suspected that would be another follow-on paper, perhaps another follow-on conversation as new results arrive.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's cool. So am I right in thinking that, like you said, you're trying to optimize the performance of single qubits, and in a sense, that's almost an error mitigation. I mean, there's a fuzzy line between error mitigation and error correction. There's some error correction going on in the value of the qubit itself, but error correction in the broader sense, in the algorithmic sense, like a surface code or an LDPC, that's, as you said, concatenating together the results from multiple qubits. So you'd still need to do some kind of error correction scheme at that algorithmic level.
When we think about bosonic codes, something that we like about these systems is not only the fact that they can be error corrected, but this also calls in for the different opportunity when you think about the full scale architecture. And you were talking about these other codes like surface codes or QLDPC codes or name your favorite code here. Bosonic codes also have the opportunity to be used as elements within these higher level codes. So with this, we call concatenation. And what's interesting in that case is because we are doing quantum error correction on single of these qubits, we can also have better knowledge of which qubit is faulty and which is not. And this is something that can be leveraged inside one of these codes to do better decoding. And build a more efficient platform. And this is really what we are trying to build at Nord, is build a more efficient platform, require fewer resources to reach the fault tolerance.
That's really interesting.
So it's a multi-tier architecture you could almost do, and it opens up room for optimism that we could be sometime soon with results from your group approaching the critical quantum error correction threshold, where there would be sustainable operations for a logical qubit that could operate in a relatively error-free amount of time for a long interval. I mean, it feels like there's a route towards some really huge achievements here.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we are working towards. So trying to make quantum error correction, and that's the mission statement here. So we're really trying to push this limit, but we take it into a different approach. So we're not trying to concatenate qubits that we have at hand first. We're really trying to push down the error rates on these bosonic system. And of course, as we speak, we're also working with more complex architecture involving many of these physical units.
So have you focused primarily on T1, T2 and single qubit gate fidelities, or are you already looking at sort of 2 qubit gate fidelities as well?
All of the above. So we are working into all these directions. The numbers will be out at some point. So this is something that is for internal R&D right now. In the paper, what the focus is on really quantum error correction benchmark. In that case, it's more using the qubit as a memory, if you'd like, trying to see how long, how quantum error correction can extend the lifetime. This is really a proof of concept. And from there, we can move to gates and also to qubit gates on our latest generation systems.
Got it. And you mentioned the transmon being part of the sort of the universal set of operations. How does that compare? How do you implement a universal set of operations in a bosonic mode versus the fermionic, sort of pure fermionic operation with transmon?
I mean, for any quantum system, what you need is, in the end, a universal set of gates to be able to do whatever you want. In our case, let's say the first task that we are up to is encoding the system into these bosonic codes. And to do this, we need a gate. We need two things. So we need a gate. We need also the universal control over the transmon, which is for free in superconducting circuits. We know the transmon really well. This is something that is easy. And also being able to drive the cavity. So it's just support that goes in our cavity and we can drive it. And then using the transmon and the cavity drive, we implement what we call this ECD gate. So echo conditional displacement gate. And this gate is really like the bread and butter in Nord. This is really the gate that we are using for any operation, state preparation, but also quantum error correction.
Interesting. That's cool. It's always fascinating to me how the different sets of operations and quantum unitary operations that need to be sort of exploited to get to that universal set of operations.
How they manifest, and the architecture.
Exactly.
It's pretty cool. Yeah,
it is. It's exotic. So, what in terms of this research paper? What do you sort of see as your Nord Quantique sort of next steps? Is it further exploitation of the quantum error correction, or are you moving on to other topics?
And both, both.
Of course.
So, of course, yes, exactly. So what we've showed in the paper is 24% increase. We need to do better, and we're working on it. Some of the aspects just involve having better hardware. This is something that will come out from the company. But some of the other thing we've discussed it. So quantum error correction is a very important tool. And we have not stopped exploring what is possible with the protocols that we already have, but improving the protocols, but also thinking about different sort of protocols that can enhance properties of our quantum error correction cycles. And the other part, of course, is building a more complex architecture in developing many of these bosonic codes as individual qubits. So this is also part of the next steps, is the things that are coming for Nord.
So that's cool. Really cool. It's foundational work on a key question. So I don't want to push too hard, but could you give us an approximate timeline where the next big wave of results are coming out? Because we're interested in knowing more about the future here. It seems very promising.
I mean, the summer will be important for us. So we are working with these systems right now. We are working toward achieving results. When it will be out, you'll witness it at the same time as us.
Fair enough. As said as the CEO should say it. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Precisely.
Well, that's really exciting, Julien. We really enjoyed hearing more about your approach. I think, if you can deliver some level of hardware, autonomous error correction down at the qubit level, that's obviously an incredible boon to the field and exciting things for it to come from Nord Quantique. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. It was a great pleasure to discuss with you these important topics.
It's our pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah. Wasn't that cool, Sebastian? That's feels like breakthrough research. I mean, I don't know the landscape entirely, but the novelty of this approach, right, where a transmon circuit, right, is sloshing these Cooper pairs back and forth. It's this harmonic system, and of course, everybody realizes that you can create a quasi particle in those systems that exactly represents
that's
a qubit. That's the old news, right? But in this whole approach, right? I mean, there's you could use in some parts of the system transmons as classic qubits, and in other parts as harmonic oscillators that create an entire bosonic a quasi-particle with essentially an infinite dimensional number of energy levels.
Kevin,
and that's the pathway for redundancy they do for this quantum error correction. So
I
cool.
get the redundancy, but just take us back to sort of basics for a second, Kevin. So a typical transmon, your run-of-the-mill transmon, super boring, it's a fermionic system, right?
Let's be careful because really, what transmons are doing is there's this Josephson junction. It's essentially set up to, in the superconducting mode, these not electrons but Cooper pairs are jumping back and forth, and there's a harmonic oscillation of the system. The standard way in firmware you can set up those oscillations is to make it so that the quasi-particle that is created from the en masse movement of these Cooper pairs is essentially the same as isomorphic to, right, what a qubit of a single electron would be theoretically, right? That there's a witness of an
electron is fermionic.
Exactly right. And so that the spin state of those electrons is the theoretical framework that you learn in quantum information science, on which quantum computing rests. But you can create a lot of different, evidently, quasi-particles of different types from the different vibration patterns inside these transmons. And so, a bosonic system, and now you've got a whole lattice of energy levels. They just keep rising. I guess it would just be a sequence. Those essentially infinite numbers of energy levels inside this harmonic system, again, is the key technical innovation they're exploring around giving a ton of room for quantum error correction. I mean, really, in the end, the classic Gauss-Kitaev press-skill error correction algorithm, it really was fundamentally based first on bosonic systems. Whether or not they had a route towards implementation at the time, I don't know. But here it is. It's realizing the deep power of the
and photons are bosonic, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
It's the microwave photons in the system that they're treating as.
That's right. And they're it's a tricky thing in this context because often, again, these swarms of these Cooper pairs, these paired electrons inside a superconducting state, are producing quasi-particles, and so then those things are not really subatomic particles; they're quasi-particles, but they have isomorphic behaviors, right? Just like a subatomic particle,
The weirdness of superconductivity,
isn't it now?
Never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
I get why we've been obsessed with it since 1911 or whatever.
I mean, there's already a huge set of abstractions to digest on computer architecture, right? I mean, like down at the CPU and then up to assembly and then, up to an operating system. But here also, I mean, there's numerous different layers of, what are we talking about in terms of a particle, right? And how is it witnessed in terms of the architecture? Yeah.
And putting it in terms of computer architecture, that's sort of my strongest, resonance with this result is that essentially they're implementing error correction at the quantum hardware level, whereas previous approaches have required a round trip for all error correction to the room temp classical computing. It's one of the critical sort of unanswered questions is, can we implement error correction without incurring so much overhead from the classical part of the error correction that you can't actually realize the performance advantages of the quantum
which seems like a question which has now been positively answered by this really interesting result. So I can't wait to see the next wave of their work, man. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm glad you sort of probed on timeline, and we got a very, as you said, sort of cautious, appropriate response, but I'm dying to see them get a system into the market that people can start playing with. That would be really, really exciting.
Yeah, such exciting times.
Yep, as always. That's great.
Cool, good stuff, right? I appreciate this time. It's fun times. Look forward to the next one, Sebastian. Thanks for setting this up.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, that's it for this episode of The New Quantum Era, a podcast by Sebastian Hassinger and Kevin Roney. Our cool theme music was composed and played by Omar Costa Hamido. Production work is done by our wonderful team over at Podfi. If you are at all like us and enjoy this rich, deep and interesting topic, please subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you may stream from. And even consider, if you like what you've heard today, reviewing us on iTunes and or mentioning us on your preferred social media platforms. We're just trying to get the word out on this fascinating topic and would really appreciate your help spreading the word and building community. Thank you so much for your time.